for joining us this morning. And Nancy, can you start recording us now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. This is Belinda Breidenbach. I am the Idaho SBEAP, and today we are going to have Renee Bashel, our Wisconsin SBEAP, presenting to us about how to read the CFR. Tony Pendola is supposed to be having some examples for us. He's the North Carolina SBEAP. And then I will finish off on the end with a look at the applicability determination index. And again, I'm Belinda Breidenbach. I am the Idaho SBEAP. So Renee?
Yes, can you hear me?
Please take it away.
Thank you, Belinda. Hi, everyone. This is Renee Bashel, as she said, from the Wisconsin SBEAP, and I've been in this role for most of the last 20 years. I started shortly after the January of 2000, and my background is engineering, and I say that because some of the techniques that I use to read through the complex engineering textbooks, I think, led to how I developed a technique for wading through the CFR rule packages that helped me break them down and then create our small business assistance materials. So I just want to remind everyone that the best place to start, I think, is the ECFR now. That will be regularly updated. You can see I took a screenshot of when it was current as of Halloween this year. But they do update that regularly, and that's where you'd want to go to get any changes that might have been incorporated into a final rule. It's going to be listed there. Once you get to the ECFR page, you're going to want to make sure and select Title 40 from the drop-down list, and then click Go to get to the list of all the different parts under Title 40. So we are always looking for the 40 CFR sections. And as we talk about looking at the rules for the National Emission Standards for hazardous air pollutants, they tend to be in the 63 thousands range of the rules. So I just have those sections circled as an example. And I tend to, my preference is to copy all of the text of the rule once I get into the particular rule that I'm looking for, and not trying to use a select all function, because then all the navigation bar information gets carried over as well, and that messes up when you try to paste it into a Word document. So I copy just the text, and sometimes that can take a little while to scroll through the whole rule down to the very bottom. And then when I get into my blank Word document, I'm going to paste using merge formatting as you right-click within the document. And that tends to save the best formatting look that makes it easier for you to edit and start working with your document. One of the things that I've preferred to do in the past, and this is what I took from taking notes in engineering classes, was using a wide color coding option from colored pens to colored highlighters, especially for these more complex rules. That really helps me to sort through each of the sections. And so you could see a screenshot of the secondary aluminum rule and all the different pieces of equipment that had requirements. And so this is the applicability section of that rule, and I've given initials and colors to each one of these sections. And then as I go, I break that down into looking at the rest of the rule and carrying that highlighting over to even to the tables in the very end of the rule, where they talk about different requirements that might apply, or there's also tables at the ends that'll talk about now I've forgotten the term, the general provisions, and some are, may or may not apply to certain sections. So I try to carry this color coding all throughout the rule into the different sections. And even in the meat of the text, I'll carry it through. You might notice this isn't the secondary aluminum one anymore, But still, using that color coding helps me break down each of the sections within the rules, and that then leads me to being able to pull together our compliance assistance resources more efficiently. And so this way I can break out, these are just screenshots from our fact sheet on the secondary aluminum rule, where we highlight the 4 pieces of equipment or groups of equipment that are affected for area sources, and then break each of those down, and the color coding in my printed copy will have given me the sections on emissions limits for the sweat furnaces, compliance demonstration for the sweat furnaces, and so on. And that works to make that a little easier to tackle. Then as I get into some other rules, I might just use a lot of descriptive terms to break out parts of the rule. In this case, it's applicability for, in the dry cleaner rule, whether they're a large area source or a major source, and which of the sections apply to those groups of sources. And in some cases, the conditions apply to any size source. So I've starred those throughout my dry cleaner rule. And so you can see another screenshot of my dry cleaner rule where I've highlighted on a particular conditions page, all right, these 3 that are starred, that's going to be applied for any size facility, whereas some of the others, they're very specific to a certain grouping of the category. And this way, again, that helped me simplify the materials, creating a source size groupings, and providing a table of that in our fact sheet. This is actually within our compliance calendar for the dry cleaners, and then breaking down the requirements by those groups, saying, all right, if you are a large area source, then these are the only pieces that apply to you. And that the way I broke down that rule helped me to set this up at the beginning. If you prefer to just work within the Word document file and not mess around with a printed copy and highlighting and pens, there are other easier techniques to use in terms of just cutting and adjusting within that Word document. So finding the applicable requirements for just a certain subgroup of the rule applicability section, and focusing on that and finding all the cross references for that particular section. You can just see a certain part of the code that I have shot here for emergency stationary rice, and I just pulled out what are the requirements for those folks and highlighting some key sections. There's other ways to work with these cross references as well that I'm hoping, I believe Tony had used some techniques with that, but I just wanted to highlight the one that I had. In this way, you can take the original text of the rule and create multiple different documents, and each one can be very specific to a particular applicability portion of that rule. And then that makes it easier as you're talking to sources or creating materials for that particular group. You've got that all in one spot, and then you can start putting that into plain English and into your materials. Another resource that I've used is to put the codes into a table, and so that you've got them broken down. That way you can also retain the citation, and then if you paraphrase and you really need to go back to a particular code to say, all right, I've paraphrased this, but somebody's asking specifically about this section, and then you can go back to where that original language is and make sure that the paraphrasing didn't necessarily lose any of the original intent. Sometimes when it comes to the amendments, when they've gone back and made changes to particularly these NESHAPs, there can be a a lot of little changes inside the rule that it might be hard to keep track of. And so one of the things that I've done is I like printing off just the amended portion, and this is just, if you don't get the daily Federal Register table of contents email, I find this a really helpful resource to get PDF copies of recently signed amendments and even the proposed rules so that you can take a look at them in a PDF format. And then I print these off and I'll take them, and if it's a particularly important rule that I've got resources already created and I need to make sure and update those, what I'll do is take these just amendments section and start writing notes within a previous version of the rule where I've made all of my different notations about grouping things by applicability. And you can see in the middle under subparagraph D here where I've crossed off at a certain section to say, you know, they've made this correction in the 4108 amendments to this part of that paragraph, and so on. And those have helped me then make sure that as I update the materials, that I'm updating the key parts and taking out other parts that no longer apply. And that's what I wanted to share, and I'm hoping Tony has come on to share his piece of the rule amendments or rule activities.
Renee, thank you so much. I really like the different techniques that you have, and I see that Tony is now here, so welcome, Tony. Tony is our North Carolina SBEAP, and we're waiting for you to share with us. Tony, I am seeing your slides, but not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. I was double muted. Well, yeah, I'm going to demonstrate two tools that I developed a long time ago. One is a hyperlinked version of the dry cleaner niche app, and the other is a rule summary of the auto body niche app. So let's start out with the dry cleaner one. Tennessee was the first to come up with this idea, which was just absolutely brilliant. Donovan, I saw you were on the phone. Did you work on that? Because I know Linda Sadler did.
Yeah, I believe you're talking about the cross-linking for the...
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that one.
Yeah. This rule is just very problematic. There's very few rules that have more references to itself, really. It's just exhaustive in this thing. And since no one knows what a reference to section 63.3220 is, that's why they added the hyperlinks. And I started using this tool when Tennessee came out with it, and I just loved it. But what I found was over time, I still needed more references. I still have to keep referring back to other stuff. So first, let's say what a hyperlink is. You see that thing in blue underlined, Federal EPA website. That's a hyperlink, and when you click on it, and if you're in Word, you have to hold down Control, and if you hover over it, it'll usually tell you have to hold down Control and then click usually. But it'll take you somewhere else. That one takes you to a website, but more common in this is a bunch of stuff that'll take you to different parts of the rule. So I worked pretty heavily with this rule when it first came out and then when they made changes to it again. And I decided that I really needed to add in all those other references. And you know, at first, I guess I didn't think it was going to be quite so big. But now, let's scroll down just a little bit, and you can see how many I added. I mean, before, all that Tennessee had was just like the section, whenever there was one of those things. But look at this thing. There's just references all over the place. Every paragraph is like half reference to something else. And so I found that that helped me a lot. Let me go back up here. One thing you might have noticed while we're going through there is there were a bunch of random words, say. For instance, year. As most of you know, a casual reading of a rule can be utterly changed once you read a corresponding definition. Sometimes enough to mean just the opposite of what you were thinking it meant, right? So we all know what a year is. Who can tell me what a year is? Somebody unmute yourself and tell me what a year is.
365 days beginning with January 1st and ending with December 31.
All right, I like it. Who else has a definition of year?
12 consecutive months.
Ah, yes. Anybody else? What about a fiscal year starting in July 1st? Yeah, year can mean some different things. In this particular rule, it means any consecutive 12-month period. So that changes things quite a bit. I mean, when it defines a year as any consecutive 12-month period, you're going to get some different results. I had a client call me in November, and it was a dry cleaner, and he told me he was going to shut down his dry cleaning business during the month of December. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, well, I don't want to exceed the 140-gallon limit. So the first thing I had to do was to explain to him that it really wasn't a limit, and that if he was recording his condenser temperature every week, like I encourage all of my dry cleaners to do, even if they're not required to do it but every 2 weeks, that he was going to be fine anyway. But the next thing I did was I got all his perk solvent numbers, put them in a little calculator I made in Excel to calculate the rolling 12-month average, and sure enough, he had exceeded the, quote, limit of 140 gallons, the demarcation there, between small and large 6 months ago. So it didn't matter, and he didn't need to miss his most profitable month. He was very happy about that. But it just kind of goes to show how, we know stuff that small businesses don't know. And so that's why they need our help. And it seems simple to us, but it's something they just don't understand. He just read something in the rule that said if you go over 140, the world's going to end, So that's what he thought. Just one more thing I wanted to point out. I also copied portions of other rules at the bottom of this rule. So this rule has a few instances where it refers to things like general provisions or a part of a different rule, say on waste management or something like that. So let's scroll down here. Hope you don't get whiplashed. And we'll see at the very bottom, I've got like 63.10, some of the stuff out of the general provisions. And that way, everything that this rule refers to is self-contained in this document, so I don't have to look somewhere else. You could also do that with a hyperlink to a website, but with government websites, they seem to change their hyperlinks so much that you just probably always have a broken link. So that's why I didn't do that, and I just put the stuff in there. Okay, so I wanted to show you how you make a hyperlink real quick. Let's see. If I go up to the beginning, we're just going to make something up, but I'll try and find something that makes a little bit of sense. Okay, let's just do this. Here's provisions mentioned in this paragraph, and here's provisions mentioned in this paragraph, right? Let's just say that you wanted the second provisions to reference up there. The first thing that you have to do is you have to make a bookmark. So you go to the word that you want to work with, and then you say, insert bookmark. You have to give it a name. It's called provisions. Add. Okay, so now you have a bookmark called provisions, and I have a bookmark for every single one of these. And I also do, just when I do the document, I do a search and replace. So it'll find every instance of dry cleaning system and turn it into a hyperlink, But, okay, so this now is a bookmark. Let's say we were wanting up here to refer down there. Or did I do that differently? Let's just do this one to make sure I did. So here, you can just right-click, and you can hit hyperlink. Your choices are to put in a website, and that's how I did the other one, and if you want to go to a website. But what this one is full of is a place in the document. So you go to place in the document, and then here's all your bookmarks that are created. we had provisions. There it is. Say OK. And now this is a hyperlink, and it refers back to the other one. So I can click on it, and it'll move it around a little bit and to show you. Now, of course, that's not a big spread, but if it was at the end of the document, it'll take you all the way to the end of the document. Any questions on that, on the dry cleaner rule or the hyperlinks? I'll give it a second because I know everybody's muted. Okay, well, if there are, we can cover it at the end too. Let's move over to the 6H rule. So this rule, this tool that I developed was for me. It is, something that is not designed to go out to a client or to anybody else really. It was just something to help me out when I was doing this. What I was trying to accomplish was to provide an overview of the key elements within the structure of the rule itself. So it's basically a Cliff Notes version of the rule. Now, the original rule, and this particular one is on the proposed rule. The proposed rule had 4,914 words. This summary only has 1,016 words. So I cut out almost 75% of the words to pare this down to just what really matters. So let's talk about some of the pros of that. First off, just preparing it helps you learn the rule quickly. I mean, I think you've probably discovered that with other stuff. When you have to summarize something or write down or do something with it, it's different than just reading it over. And so you get to know it pretty well yourself when you're doing that. Now, once it's done, you can reread that, and it's only 3 pages. So I can reread this entire thing and really kind of store those main concepts in my brain for easy recall. And the truth is, I found that that kind of recall usually causes others to consider you an expert. And finally, you can pull it up quickly and cite specific portions, even if you're on a phone call. If somebody calls in and they're saying, well, what is this about this booth? What are the requirements for it? I can pull up the summary really quickly, go right to the part where it talks about it. And I'm not running through a bunch of legalese while I'm also trying to talk on the phone. I'm seeing just some really specific key text on there. Now, the main downside of this tool, I think, is that it's a little subjective. So, what I consider something that is worth cutting out, you might not. I was trying to think of an example. I think maybe in the proposed rule here, it used to talk about aerospace coatings and stuff for area sources. Well, we don't, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have any small businesses that are doing aerospace coatings. So I just ignored that part. I didn't put it in there. Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption, Tony. We are still seeing the dry cleaning document. I didn't know if you were trying to show something different.
Oh, thank you.
You bet.
So do I have to stop share and reshare?
Yes, you may want to do that.
I'm going to stop that share and start a reshare with this one. Oh, no, with this one. Can you see the rule summary now?
Yes, sir, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, this is what it looks like. I left the section numbers in there because that's important. Somebody might say, well, what's this stuff about section 63.11171? Well, there you can go to. And it also left the subsections and stuff in there because that stuff's important. And if there are, and I could do a combo hyperlink, which I thought of later with this as well. But, if something refers to section B here, you can see exactly what they're referring to. It's basically just a really pared down version of the rule itself, and it gets rid of all the legalese, and it gets rid of, stuff that is just superfluous, doesn't matter, doesn't help you understand the rule, and just goes to the really core stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll through all this so you can see it's just not very much for such a big rule with so many different things. And I will say, in the dry cleaner hyperlink that I showed you, one of the, a lot of that hyperlink was definitions. So I think those are pretty important. In this rule, The very last part of the rule, I think, yeah, what definitions do I need to know? I just put the things that are defined there. So again, if somebody has a question about electrostatic application, I know that there's a definition for that, so I'm going to go ahead and go look that one up in the definitions in the rule itself. But I don't need to put them all here. I just need to know which things are defined, because if it was something that's not defined by the rule, then I know that we're just going to have to go with either a Clean Air Act definition or just a simple thing about what a definition is. So any questions about this tool or the other? All right, well, that's it for me. I need to stop sharing.
Tony, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to go ahead and share, which will probably, oh, it says you do need to stop your share.
And while you do that, Belinda, I'll just remind people that on your lower menu bar, you can chat questions if you prefer not to ask them verbally. So you can always send in a chat.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tony. And the final piece today, I'm going to talk to you about the Applicability Determination Index. And I am curious, I got a one message in this morning from someone that was familiar with it, but I am curious whether you just want to, send it in on the chat or not. How many people have actually used the Applicability Determination Index? Or you can
I have.
What?
Okay.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. So this was, and I put the link here, and we'll see how I do with switching screens. But to let you know, when it was created, this was the computer system when it was brought into the modern tech age. So when you see the screen and you go, man, that's not so snazzy, you'll realize that in the beginning, these had actually been paper letters, and then they were put into a database that basically, was of the age where you had the little green lines of text going across. And then in 1995, created the new internet version. And as you will see, it does not look like much has changed since when it was first put up in 95. Let's see, I am going to go for a stopping sharing and then try to share my other screen. So we're going to see how well this works. Okay, so now you should be able to see the Applicability Determination Index. And let me pop back. So I want to point out that what it asks you, it gives you a number of things that you can search under. If you actually knew the control number of a specific document, I really doubt that's going to happen. Under updates, this is actually only updated once per year. So it is important to realize that it is a yearly update. You could look by what office wrote the letter, categories, even the date range, and the author. But what I think is actually the most helpful is to do a word search or the subpart or even a specific reference. So what I wanted to go through was just start with something very broad. So we're going to go into NSPS subpart 000, non-metallic mineral processing. And I'm going to start with just one term, and this makes it very simple. You just hit submit query, and you will see that we have quite a few different determinations that have been made. There are, I believe, 80 some here. We can see the date of the letter, control numbers, categories, what region it came out of, and who actually wrote the correspondence. And when you look through here, you'll see a lot of them are asking questions on source testing. And a number of them, they seem to have fairly long titles, but it's really hard to figure out, well, where's the information that I might be looking for? And you could wade through all of them, but you could go back and try to put in a little more detail. So let's say this time we're going to ask for non-metallic mineral processing, but we're also going to look for replacement, which is definitely handled a little differently in this subpart. So here, when we ask for a display, you will see that we're kind of going back to seeing some of that old coding where it has our two criteria and that it's 1 and 2. So we'll submit that. It's just kind of showing you back to some of the old coding. And now we can see we've been moved down to a much more manageable 7 different letters that deal with replacement parts. So here we can read through some of the titles and say, okay, we've got relocation and crushers, and let's just start taking a look at one of these and see if it maybe answers the question that we are trying to answer for a client ourselves. So here comes up what this actual letter looks like, who it was sent to. There's an abstract, which is very nice, so I can just look at that and be able to sometimes very quickly say, oh, no, that's not what I'm looking for, or, oh, I think this is going to hit what I am looking for. So then you can go in and actually read the text of the entire letter. So when we have some specific questions where we've read through the CFR and we're still a little unsure about something, this is the great place to look at the ADI and see if anyone has asked a similar question before. I'm also going to go back and do one more example with something that, instead of a regulation that is as old as NSPS 000, let's go down and look for our painting subpart and see if we, and you notice we have to just keep scrolling through, but here's our surface coating. Oh, let's see, wait, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's 5. That's not the right one. Let's see if we get to 6H. And this does tell you that, oh, there it is. Takes a little scrolling, but this is a much newer rule. And we can see that from the time it's come out, there have only been a few questions asked on it. We've got undercoating, bedlining, and this one, we don't really know what it is. So it's one that you need to open up. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have an abstract, but we do a quick scan through. They're talking about the 3-ounce paint cups. And they're talking about touch-up and spot repair. So we can pretty quickly determine, oh, does this actually refer to something I have a question on, or do I need to look for something else? So let's see. If I come back to here, are you able again to see my my slides?
Yes.
Okay.
See them in note,
With the notes.
but that's just fine.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just go through here. So these are all the things you can search under, as I was saying, but I think the word search, the subparts, and the references are the ones that are the most useful for us. Those were the examples of the queries that I put in, and that is that. And so hopefully if you haven't used the applicability determination index, you will look for that tool as well. So now I am going to ask if anybody has any questions for Renee, Tony, or myself. No questions? Well, that's good. I think then everybody is probably looking to see how to implement both Renee and Tony's methods of going through the CFR, which I thought both had some excellent ideas, and I know I'll be implementing them. And if you have not used the applicability determination index, I hope that you'll find that as a good tool now as well.
Belinda, can I ask a little question since we have some time and
Yes.
nobody's piping up? So I took both of these documents to EPA, to OAQPS many years ago, and I said, it'd be so nice, in my opinion, if when a rule came out, there just wasn't a CFR reference to a rule, but there were some tools to go along with it, especially to help you either understand it quickly or provide compliance assistance for it quickly, or things like that. So I showed them these as examples. I said, what about something like this? I mean, for instance, the hyperlink thing, they could do that, and they could do that themselves and secretly if they didn't want help from us. But if they wanted something like, a summary document, or even like a RegNav tool, if that was something we could do, if they would maybe let us participate earlier in the process, we could maybe do some of that stuff for them and help them out. Do you guys think that it would be nice if they did, let's just say, like the hyperlink document to rules? Is that something we should maybe ask them about and say, is this something you could provide? Or should we just say something probably general, like, could you provide some tools at the very start of the rule? Or do we just let them do it like they do it and throw it out there, and then we'll all react afterwards?
Tony, this is Belinda, and I think it would be great if we got some tools Now, I cannot remember the reference off the top of my head, but I believe that as part of Section 507 of the Clean Air Act, that EPA is supposed to be providing these tools for small business, which really actually would be for us to provide them, you know, to then use them for the small businesses. But I think there's actually a reference.
Yeah, I believe there is too. And, you know, I think they've taken that in the past to mean that little trifold brochure and they're done. and the trifold brochure is great. It has its purpose. It's something that we can print and give out, and it does a really high level overview of the rule. But you know, I think more could be done. And I think that with the new focus on outreach, that the outreach group might want to do some of this stuff. I mean, back then they had too many other priorities, but they're changing those around now.
I agree. What do other people think?
Well, I agree definitely that some kind of reference document, the cross-referencing with the hyperlinks, or more RegNav tools, I think those would be really great to have coming from EPA, because then it's not us you know, doing some level of interpretation that people might not trust. If it's coming from EPA and it's a more useful tool, I think people would be more, would find that very helpful.
And would you agree that sometimes some of those tools are not created by EPA because they are concerned about interpretation? And, you know, the question answer document for 6H is a good example. They drafted it and never wanted to finish it because they were concerned about certain interpretations.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Even if they drafted it and then didn't want to necessarily lay claim, or, you know, we could put a disclaimer and still use the work and say, you know, this has been prepared, but does not, you know, supersede the actual regulation text. And if we were to request more of that, would Rhonda Wright be the right person to go through?
Yeah, definitely. I think she would be the best first person.
Well, Tony, it might be a good idea if maybe we had a conversation with her in the next few weeks.
I like it.
All right.
And one other thing we can do, Belinda, is when you give your report out to NSC, you could include that as kind of an ask via NSC too.
Yes, very good. All right. Well, I thank everyone for attending, and we will have this presentation up on the website soon for the people that were not able to be here today, because I did receive several messages from people who were wanting to attend but could not. So thank you, Renee. Thank you, Tony. And thank you, everyone who attended.
Thank you, Belinda.